Hey everyone, long-time lurker, first-time poster. I wasn't planning to share this, but after what happened, I need to get it off my chest. For context, I run a mid-sized tech startup. We're not Google or anything, but we've grown fast, and I've spent the last few years focusing on strategy, funding, and expansion. Lately though, I started feeling like I was losing touch with what it's actually like to work here. I'd get polished reports from my execs saying everything was great, but then I'd see anonymous Glassdoor reviews talking about burnout, toxic managers, and employees feeling unheard. That didn't sit right with me. So I did what any slightly unhinged CEO might do. I went undercover. With the help of HR, who was sworn to secrecy, I created a fake identity, Sam, a mid-level IT support specialist hired through a temp agency. I shaved my beard, got some cheap glasses, and swapped my tailored suits for jeans and a hoodie. My goal was simple: see the company from the ground level. The first red flag hit before I even started. My onboarding consisted of a single email with a link to some outdated training videos. No welcome meeting, no introductions, nothing. I showed up on my first day, and nobody even seemed to expect me. When I asked for help setting up my company laptop, the IT guy just sighed and muttered, "Good luck." I was starting to get the feeling that things weren't as smooth as my execs claimed. Then I met my manager. Let's call him Kevin. Kevin was something else. He spent most of the day locked in his office, barely spoke to the team, and when he did, it was usually to complain. If an employee asked him for guidance, he'd brush them off or get irritated. At one point, I overheard him ranting about how corporate AKME had no clue how hard they worked. I couldn't help but wonder, if this is how he acts with a new hire, what's he like when I'm not around? But the real gut punch came later. I was sitting in the break room when I overheard two employees talking in hushed voices. One of them, a woman named Sarah, was venting about how she'd been promised a promotion 3 times, only to be passed over. She had been with the company for 5 years, one of our first hires, and yet she felt stuck. "I love this place," she said, stirring her coffee, "but I don't think leadership even knows I exist." That hit me hard. And that wasn't the only problem. I saw engineers pulling 12-hour days just to meet impossible deadlines. I watched customer support agents handle back-to-back calls while higher-ups ignored their requests for better tools. There were incredible people here, smart, hardworking, passionate, but somewhere along the way, we stopped listening to them. By the end of my first week, I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't just sit back and pretend everything was fine. But how do you fix a broken culture without exposing yourself too soon? Alright, so after my first week undercover as Sam, the temp IT support specialist, I had already seen enough to know that my company wasn't the well-oiled machine my execs made it out to be. Employees were burnt out, managers were out of touch, and some of the best people in the company felt overlooked. But the real challenge? Figuring out how to fix it, without blowing my cover. I decided that before I made any drastic moves, I needed to get deeper into the day-to-day struggles of my employees. So, I played the role. I kept my head down, did my IT support tasks, and listened. I took notes, actual physical notes, on everything I saw. The little things, the big things, the things that my reports never mentioned. Here's what I discovered. If you remember from part 1, my direct manager, Kevin, was not exactly a model leader. His management style could be summed up as avoid, complain, repeat. He rarely checked in on the team, didn't support struggling employees, and openly bad-mouthed upper management, aka me. One afternoon, I found him in the break room talking to another manager, and I caught the tail end of their conversation. They keep promising promotions, but do they ever happen? No. They just use us until we burn out. At this point, I'm just waiting for the next job offer to come in. No way I'm staying here another year. I couldn't believe it. Not only was he disengaged, but he was also feeding that disengagement into others. This was my company. My employees. And here was a mid-level manager who had essentially given up. Worse yet, he had a reputation for shutting down new ideas. I saw this firsthand when one of my IT coworkers, Marcus, proposed an automation system that would save the team hours of repetitive tasks. Kevin dismissed it instantly. That sounds complicated. We don't have time for extra projects. I could see the frustration on Marcus's face. That wasn't just a lost opportunity for efficiency, it was a clear signal to the team that their ideas didn't matter. I was starting to realize that Kevin wasn't the root problem. He was a symptom of a bigger issue. Then there were employees like Sarah. She was one of the longest-serving team members in my department, yet she was stuck in the same role she had 5 years ago. And not because she wasn't qualified, she was one of the sharpest people in the office. One evening, after most of the team had left, I casually asked her why she hadn't moved up in the company. She gave a sad chuckle. I've tried. I've applied for internal roles, talked to my managers, even taken on extra work to prove myself. Every time, I get told it's not the right time, or that they're looking for someone with more leadership experience. But how am I supposed to get leadership experience if they never give me a shot? I didn't have an answer. She had been loyal to the company since the beginning, and we had let her stagnate. How many other Sarahs were there in my company? People who were quietly killing themselves for the job but felt invisible? One of the biggest shocks came when I saw how much our customer support team was struggling. Most of our executive meetings revolved around product development, growth strategies, and investor relations. But rarely, if ever, did I hear much about our support team, the people actually dealing with our customers. Let me tell you, these folks were warriors. I sat with them for a shift and watched as they fielded call after call from frustrated customers, dealing with software bugs, billing errors, and impossible service expectations. And yet, they barely had the tools they needed. Their software was outdated, response times were slow because of a clunky ticketing system, and they were constantly short-staffed. One agent, Priya, told me, "Honestly, I love helping customers. But half the time, I feel like I'm set up to fail. We keep reporting the same tech issues, but nothing changes. The higher-ups don't care." Spoiler alert, I was one of those higher-ups. This part stung the most. I'd always prided myself on running a company that listened to its employees. But sitting in the trenches, I realized just how out of touch I had become. The reports I got in executive meetings were sugar-coated. The metrics looked fine on paper, but they didn't reflect the human experience of working here. Managers were hoarding talent instead of promoting it. Employees were burning out trying to hit impossible goals. And some of the best ideas were being ignored because of outdated hierarchies. I was running a company that rewarded efficiency and output, but not people. And that had to change. At this point, I was tempted to just rip off my disguise, call an all-hands meeting, and drop a guess what? I'm the CEO bomb. But I knew that wouldn't actually fix anything. I needed to gather more information. I needed to really understand how my employees felt, without the filter of knowing their boss was watching. So I decided to push a little harder. 1. I started asking what if. I began casually asking employees what they would change if they had the power. What if we had a mentorship program to help employees like Sarah gain leadership experience? What if we updated the support team software so they could actually do their jobs without stress? What if we rewarded managers who developed talent instead of just hoarding it? Their responses were eye-opening. People wanted to contribute. They wanted to improve things. But somewhere along the way, they had stopped believing it was possible. 2. I secretly tested management. I knew that leadership was a problem, but I needed proof. I started tracking how managers responded to employee concerns. When Marcus brought up his automation idea again, I casually encouraged him to take it to Kevin. When Sarah applied for another internal promotion, I kept an eye on how her application was handled. And when Priya flagged a major tech issue to her supervisor, I watched to see if it ever got escalated. Spoiler, it didn't. 3. I set the stage for a shakeup. After 2 weeks undercover, I had seen enough. I had my evidence. I had my notes. And I had a plan. It was time to pull the curtain back. The next morning, I sent out a company-wide email. Mandatory all-hands meeting, 3 p.m. No exceptions. The subject line alone sent a ripple of whispers through the office. Some people thought it was a layoff announcement. Others assumed it was another pep talk from the execs. But nobody, not even Kevin, was ready for what was about to happen. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, the office had shifted into quiet tension. People were whispering at their desks, speculating about the sudden all-hands meeting. Some thought layoffs were coming. Others assumed it was another generic company update from leadership. I stood near the back of the conference room, still in my Sam disguise, watching as employees filed in. Sarah took a seat near the front, nervously tapping a pen against her notebook. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Priya from support sat in the middle, whispering something to the coworker next to her. And then there was Kevin, my manager, who strolled in late with a cup of coffee, looking unimpressed, like this was a waste of his time. The execs were already seated near the projector, looking their usual polished selves. My COO Mark glanced around the room with that standard corporate expression of someone about to deliver a carefully worded statement. My HR lead sat stiffly beside him, clearly uncomfortable. She was one of the few who had known about my undercover mission, and I could tell she was anxious about how this was about to unfold. Once everyone settled, Mark stood up and cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We wanted to have a conversation about some of the recent concerns and challenges we've been hearing about across the company. I let him talk for about 30 seconds before stepping forward. Actually, Mark, I'll take it from here. He hesitated, confused, but nodded and stepped aside. I reached up, took off my glasses, and pulled the cheap hoodie over my head. A few gasps rippled through the room, and I watched as realization dawned across the faces of the employees who had worked with me for the past 2 weeks. Kevin, my manager, went completely pale. Sarah's jaw dropped. Priya's eyes widened. I let the silence hang for a second before speaking. For those of you who don't recognize me, my name is not Sam. My name is, I said my full name, the name attached to every major decision this company had made. And for the past 2 weeks, I've been working undercover in my own company. You could have heard a pin drop. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking like he wanted to sink into the floor. The execs exchanged glances, clearly thrown off by the fact that I hadn't told them what was happening today. I took a breath. I did this because I needed to see for myself what it's actually like to work here, not through reports, not through executive meetings, but by experiencing it firsthand. And let me tell you, what I found was disappointing. I scanned the room, making eye contact with the employees I had worked alongside. I saw some of the hardest working people in this company getting overlooked, ignored, and burnt out. I saw customer support agents set up to fail because no one was giving them the tools they needed. I saw brilliant ideas get dismissed because of outdated hierarchies. I saw people like Sarah, who has been here for 5 years and has applied for promotions 3 times, get passed over for no reason other than the fact that leadership isn't paying attention. Sarah looked down at her lap, her face flushed. And let's talk about leadership, I continued, turning toward Kevin. He straightened up, suddenly on high alert. Kevin, I said, my voice even, over the past 2 weeks, I've watched you ignore employees, dismiss ideas, and complain about this company more than any manager I've ever met. I overheard you say that you're just waiting for another job offer so you can get out. So let me do you a favor, you don't need to wait anymore. You're done here. A murmur spread through the room. Kevin opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was still in shock, probably trying to process the fact that the temp worker he had been brushing off all week was actually the CEO. I looked at the rest of the employees, who were watching with wide eyes. This isn't about revenge, I told them. It's about accountability. The culture of this company is broken, and I take full responsibility for that. I let things slide for too long. I trusted that my leadership team was creating the kind of workplace we promised people when they joined. But I was wrong. And now, we're going to fix it. I turned to Mark, my CO, who was watching all of this unfold with a stunned expression. Starting today, we're restructuring leadership. No more managers who block talent from moving up. No more teams left understaffed while we prioritize expansion over the people actually keeping this company running. I want a full review of promotions and hiring practices. We're also updating how we support employees, mentorship programs, clearer paths for advancement, and an overhaul of the tools our teams need to do their jobs. I gestured toward the support team. And for starters, we're upgrading the entire customer service system. No more outdated software. No more impossible expectations. You all deserve better than what we've been giving you. For the first time since I started talking, I saw something shift in the room. People were sitting up straighter. Some of them looked hopeful. Others were still skeptical, and I didn't blame them. They'd heard promises before. But this wasn't just a promise. This was happening. As I wrapped up, I made one final point. If you have ideas, concerns, or ways we can improve, my door is open. And I mean that. No more layers of middle management standing between leadership and the people actually doing the work. I want to hear from you. I scanned the room one last time before saying, that's all for now. Let's get back to work. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sarah stood up and started clapping. One by one, others joined in. Not a slow, hesitant clap, but a real one. We've been waiting for this kind of applause. I glanced at Priya, who gave me a small nod, an unspoken thank you. I knew this was just the beginning. Fixing things wouldn't happen overnight. I had spent years letting problems fester without realizing it, and now I had to rebuild the trust we had lost. But as I looked around the room, seeing the flickers of hope and renewed energy in my employees' eyes, I knew one thing for sure. We were finally moving in the right direction. The applause died down, and people slowly shuffled back to their desks. Some looked energized, others wary. I didn't blame them, words were cheap. They'd heard promises before. Now, I had to prove this wasn't just a speech. I spent the rest of the day in meetings. First with my execs, who, to be honest, were caught completely off guard. Mark, my COO, was frustrated. You blindsided us, he said, arms crossed. Yeah, I replied, because I needed to see what you wouldn't tell me. I laid it out, real leadership changes, actual investments in employee development, and fixing the problems I saw firsthand. HR started reviewing managers like Kevin. The promotion process was getting overhauled. And customer support? They were finally getting the tools they needed. That afternoon, Sarah came to my office. I wasn't expecting any of this, she admitted. You deserve better, I told her. And if leadership isn't recognizing that, then leadership needs to change. She smiled, small, cautious, but real. By the end of the week, I could already feel the shift. Employees were speaking up. Managers knew we were watching. And most importantly, the people who had felt invisible finally knew they mattered. Change wasn't going to happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, it was happening. And I wasn't going to let it stop. A week after the big reveal, the office felt different. The air was lighter, conversations more open. But I knew better than to think everything had magically fixed itself. Change takes time. And resistance? Oh, there was plenty of that. Some managers weren't thrilled about the shake-up. I overheard one whisper to another, this won't last. He'll get bored and move on. Wrong. I wasn't going anywhere. One of the biggest challenges was getting people to believe this wasn't just a temporary PR stunt. Employees like Sarah, Marcus, and Priya had been let down too many times before. So I doubled down. Sarah? She got the promotion she deserved. But not just as a gift from me, I made sure she had mentorship, support, and a real path to leadership. Marcus? His automation idea was fast-tracked, and within days, it started saving the IT team hours of work. Priya? The new support system was in motion, and I made sure she was part of the team testing it. Kevin, my now former manager, didn't take the news well. His exit wasn't dramatic, just a quiet, stiff handshake and a muttered good luck. But the damage he left behind? That would take longer to fix. One afternoon, Priya stopped by my office. I still don't know if I trust this, she admitted. But I appreciate it. That was enough. Slowly, the company was changing. Not because of me, but because the right people were finally being heard. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually leading again. 2 weeks after the big reveal, I could see the cracks in the old system beginning to heal. Employees were speaking up more, ideas weren't getting shot down before they had a chance, and the weight of burnout seemed to be lifting, slowly but surely. But I also knew not everyone was on board. Some of the mid-level managers, those who had benefited from the old top-heavy structure, weren't happy. They weren't outright defiant, but they were passive-aggressively dragging their feet on implementing the changes. I caught one of them, Greg, complaining to another, saying, "He's just doing this for show. Give it a month, and we'll be back to normal." I called Greg into my office. "You don't believe in this, do you?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable but shrugged. "I just don't see the point of shaking everything up when things were fine before." "Fine for who?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Because from where I was standing, people were exhausted, stuck, and unmotivated. Greg exhaled. Look, I get that you want to make changes, but people like me, we've been here for years. We know how things run. You can't just expect us to flip a switch overnight. I don't, I admitted. But I do expect you to lead. And leading means adapting, even when it's uncomfortable. I let that sit for a moment before adding, if you're not willing to help build the company we say we want to be, then you need to ask yourself if this is the right place for you. Greg left without saying much, but I saw a shift in him the next few days. He wasn't all in yet, but at least he wasn't standing in the way anymore. Meanwhile, Sarah had stepped fully into her new leadership role, and I could already see the impact. She was organizing team check-ins, mentoring junior employees, and most importantly, making sure no one else got overlooked the way she had. One evening, she knocked on my office door. "You really meant it, huh?" she asked. "Meant what?" "That this wasn't just a speech. That things are actually changing." I nodded. "I did. And they are." She smiled. "Good. Because I have an idea." And just like that, I knew this company was finally becoming what I always wanted it to be. A month after my undercover experiment, the company wasn't just changing, it was evolving. Not perfectly, not without resistance, but in a way that actually meant something. Sarah's idea? A cross-team mentorship program, pairing senior employees with newer hires to prevent talent from slipping through the cracks. It was simple, effective, and something we should have done years ago. I gave her full ownership of it. She ran with it, and within weeks, employees were actually excited about career growth again. Marcus? His automation project was now officially part of our internal workflow, saving time and frustration across multiple departments. The best part? He got the credit, not some manager taking it for themselves. Priya? The new customer support system was live. She and her team had input on every feature. For the first time in years, they weren't just reacting to problems, they were actively solving them before they started. Even Greg, the skeptical manager, had come around. Slowly, but still. One afternoon, he pulled me aside and admitted, "All right, I'll say it. I was wrong. This is working." But the biggest shift? People believed in the company again. I saw it in the way employees spoke up in meetings, in how managers actually listened, in the energy of the office that had been missing for so long. We still had a long way to go, but the culture was no longer something we just talked about. It was something we were actually building. And as for me, I learned the most important leadership lesson of my life. A company isn't about the product, the investors, or the bottom line. It's about the people. The moment leadership forgets that, everything starts to crumble. I let that happen once. I won't let it happen again. Would I go undercover again? If I ever start feeling out of touch, you bet I will. Because the best way to lead is to listen.